The bell in the watchtower was screaming before Tobias Quinn even reached the gate, and by the time he shouldered through the crowd of frightened settlers, 3 crossbows were already leveled at the orc woman kneeling in the mud. She had crashed through the outer palisade on a horse that collapsed the moment its hooves cleared the gate, and now she knelt in the churned muck of Kestrel, Hold's central yard with rain sheeting down around her. One hand pressed to a wound at her side, the other raised open and empty in a gesture that meant nothing to the terrified guards ringing her with steel. Torchlight caught on her tusks, on the dark green of her skin gone gray with blood loss, on the war hammer still strapped across her back that she had not drawn. Orc inside the walls. Someone was shouting, over and over, as if the words themselves might summon more hands to the fight. Kill it before it rises. Commander Aldous Voss came striding out of the officers' hall with his sword already bare, his gray beard slicked flat with rain, his voice carrying the particular certainty of a man who had never once doubted himself. "Doomhammer colors," he said, seeing the hammer at her back, seeing the crude clan sigil branded into her shoulder guard. "She's come to deliver her mother's war before her mother's warriors arrive to back it. Kill her now and we save ourselves the trouble of a parley." Tobias did not remember deciding to move. He remembered only that his boots were already carrying him between the leveled crossbows and the kneeling woman, his hands raised, his heart slamming so hard against his ribs he thought it might crack them. "Wait," he said. "Don't." "Quinn, get out of the way," Voss snapped. "This isn't your fight. You're a tracker, not a soldier." "Then let a tracker tell you what a soldier's missing," Tobias said, and he did not move an inch, though 3 crossbow bolts now had a clear line through him to reach her. "She's wounded. She's unarmed her hammer, and she rode through open country to get here, which means something's chasing her worse than we are." The orc woman lifted her head. Her eyes found him through the rain, dark amber, glassy with pain but sharp as flint beneath it, and something in her face eased just slightly, the way a held breath eases when it is finally let go. "Tobias Quinn," she said, and his name in her mouth was rough and low, carrying the guttural music of a language that was not hers alone. "I was sent to bring your fort my mother's threat. Leave this valley, or face the Doomhammer clan in open war before the next full moon." Voss's men shifted, weapons tightening in their grip, and someone behind Tobias whispered that they should just be done with it, spear her now before she finishes whatever spell or curse she meant to lay. "I am not finishing it," Urzoth said, and her voice cracked, not with weakness but with something that sounded impossibly like grief. "I rode past my own scouts to reach you first. I bled through half the valley to say this to your face instead of his." She did not look at Voss. She looked only at Tobias, and the rain ran down between them like a curtain neither one moved to part. "I did not come to deliver a threat, Hunter. I came to deliver a warning. There is a fire coming for this fort that will not care whose colors it burns first, and I would rather my own mother call me traitor than let it take you unwarned." The yard went utterly silent but for the rain and the horses' last shuddering breaths where it had fallen. Tobias Quinn had lived at the edge of the map long enough to know that silence like that never lasted, and it did not. "Seize her," Voss barked. "Whatever tale she's spinning, she's still an orc inside our walls, and I'll not have her poisoning good sense with pretty words about warnings. Chain her in the old grain cellar. We'll decide what to do with her once the council's convened." 2 guardsmen moved to obey, and Urzoth's hand went instinctively toward the hammer at her back before she stopped herself, forced her fingers open again, let them take her by the arms though every line of her body screamed against the indignity of it. She did not fight. She kept her eyes on Tobias the whole time they dragged her past him, and what passed between them in that single stretched moment was not fear, not on either side, but the first thread of something neither of them yet had a name for. "I will speak the whole of it," she said to him low as they hauled her by, "if you will listen." "I'll listen," Tobias said. "I promise you that." It was, he would think much later, the easiest promise he had ever made and the hardest one he had ever kept. Kestrel Hold had been a ruin for 11 years before the Crown decided its position at the mouth of the Aldervale Pass made it worth resettling, and even now, 2 seasons into the rebuilding, it wore its scars plainly. Half the outer wall was still the crumbled gray stone the orcs had left behind after the last border war, patched with green timber that had not yet weathered to match. The old keep tower leaned a hand's width off true. Sheep grazed in what had once been a killing field, and children played among broken arrow slits that had, within living memory, loosed real arrows at real men. Tobias Quinn had come to the Hold 8 months earlier, hired on as its hunter and tracker because no one else in the resettlement party knew the high country the way he did. He had grown up in these mountains, orphaned young to a hunting accident that had taken his father and left him alone with a rifle, a trapline, and a silence he had never quite learned to fill with other people. He was good at his work, well liked in the quiet, unremarkable way of men who kept to themselves and never asked for more than their due, and utterly unused to being looked at the way Urzoth Doomhammer had looked at him in the rain. He went to the grain cellar that night before the second watch, against every rule Voss had laid down about the prisoner being left alone. She was chained to the stone post at the cellar's center, her wound crudely bandaged by someone with no gentleness in their hands, and when the lantern light fell across her face, she did not flinch or shrink the way he half expected. She simply watched him come, the way a wolf watches a man approach its den, patient, assessing, entirely unafraid. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." Humans do not always keep the words they say to orcs. She said it without heat, a simple observation, the kind a person makes about weather. "I'm not most humans," Tobias said, and set the lantern down and knelt to look at the bandage. "That's a bad wound. Who did that to you?" "The same men your commander should fear more than he fears me." She let him look, which surprised him more than anything else, that Nighten orc warrior, chained and wounded, allowing a stranger's hands near an injury. "They call themselves the Ash Reavers. Outlaws, deserters from 3 different armies and worse men besides, who found each other in the high caves above the pass and decided the world owed them more than it had given. I've heard the name. Voss thinks it's a story mothers tell to keep children from wandering the ridge line. Voss is a fool who has never smelled a Reaver camp." Her lip curled back from her tusks, not quite a smile. "I have. I tracked them for 6 days before I found what I was looking for, and what I found should have gone straight to my mother's fire, not to your gate. But I could not carry it to her without also carrying it to you, because by the time I understood what they meant to do, there was no longer time to choose only one." "What do they mean to do?" Urzoth was quiet a moment, studying him the way she might study a man she was deciding whether to trust with a blade at his own throat. "They wear our marks," she said finally. "Doomhammer sigils, carved crude into stolen axes, painted onto shields with clay the color of our war paint. They have been riding the border, raiding your farms and my clan's herds both, leaving my people's marks on the wreckage of your homesteads, and your people's coins scattered near our sacred grounds, so that each side believes the other has broken the old peace. They want a war, Hunter. A war between my clan and your fort, so that while both sides bleed each other white, the Reavers can pick the valley clean of everything either of us has built." Tobias sat back on his heels, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, because the shape of it was too ugly and too plausible to argue against. "And the threat you were sent to deliver," he said slowly. "Your mother believes we raided her herds." "My mother believes what the evidence tells her, as any chieftain must. She sent me to give your fort 1 moon to leave the valley or answer for it in blood." Urzoth's chains rattled softly as she shifted, and there was something almost weary in the sound. "I rode 2 days to bring you that message. On the second night I found the Reaver camp instead, and I saw the truth of it laid out plain as a butcher's table. I could have turned back to my mother's fire with proof enough to stay her hand. I chose instead to ride here first, wounded, through country I did not know as well as my own, because I decided that a fort full of strangers deserved to hear the truth before they died for a lie. Why, the word came out of him rougher than he intended. Why risk your own neck for people who'd sooner put a spear through you than shake your hand? For the first time since he had knelt beside her, something uncertain moved across Urzoth Doomhammer's face, quickly hidden, quickly smoothed away, but he had seen it. "Because of Grosh," she said. "Who's Grosh?" "My brother. 15 summers old, foolish the way all 15 summer boys are foolish, who slipped past our scouts 3 moons ago to see the human fort with his own eyes because he did not believe the stories his elders told him about your kind." She met Tobias's gaze directly, and her voice roughened. "He fell into a hunter's snare set for wolves and broke his leg badly enough that he could not free himself. A human found him first. That human could have killed him, could have brought him back to your commander in chains, or simply left him to die in the trap and called it justice for every raid our clan has ever made against yours. Instead, that human set the bone himself, splinted it with wood from his own kindling pile, and carried my brother 2 miles through the dark to leave him where our scouts would find him before dawn, without ever once telling your commander what he had done." Tobias's chest went very still. "That was you," Urzoth said. "Was it not, Tobias Quinn?" He had not spoken of it to anyone, not even Voss, because he had known exactly what the commander would have done with an orc boy caught inside their borders, and he had not been able to stomach the thought of it. He had told himself it was simple decency, the same decency he'd have shown any creature caught broken-legged in a trap not meant for it. He had not known the boy had a sister, let alone one who would carry that single act of mercy across 2 days of hard riding and a knife wound to find him again. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. "I know." Urzoth's voice had gone soft in a way that did not match the iron chains around her wrists. "That is exactly why I trust it. A man who does a kindness and tells no one has no reason to lie about who he is. So when I found the Reaver camp and understood what was coming, I did not ask myself who I could trust in your fort. I asked myself who had already shown me the truth of his own heart without ever knowing I was watching." She lifted her chin, and there was pride in it now, fierce and unhidden. "That is why I rode past your commander's hall to find you first, Hunter. Not because I owed you a debt, though I do. Because you were the only man in this whole cursed valley I already knew would listen before he judged." The lantern hissed and guttered low between them, and Tobias Quinn found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely at a loss for words. "I'll get you out of these chains," he said finally, "and I'll get the truth in front of Voss if I have to drag him out to the Reaver camp myself and make him look at it. He will not believe you. Then I'll make him believe you instead." Urzoth studied him a long moment, something warm and dangerous kindling behind her amber eyes. "You are either the bravest fool I have met in these mountains, Tobias Quinn, or the first honest man." "Maybe I'm both," he said, and for the first time that night she almost smiled. It took him 3 days to convince Voss to even consider riding out to look, and he only managed it by appealing to the one thing the commander valued above his own pride: the safety of the fort itself. If there was truly an outlaw band using orc marks to bait a war, Voss reasoned aloud in the council hall, then better to know the size and shape of the threat before either the Doomhammer clan or the Crown's own reinforcements arrived to find Kestrel Hold burned to its foundations. He agreed to a small scouting party himself, unwilling to go, but willing to send Tobias, 2 of his most seasoned guardsmen, and under close watch and with a hunting knife but no hammer, the orc woman herself, since she alone knew where the Reaver camp lay. They rode out at first light under a sky the color of old iron, up through switchbacks Tobias had walked 100 times chasing elk and deer, into country wilder and colder the higher they climbed. Urzoth rode easily despite her half-healed wound, her borrowed mare picking its way over scree with an assurance that told Tobias she had grown up on ground like this the way he had grown up on the lower slopes, each of them fluent in a landscape that would have killed a careless man within a day. "You favor your left side," she observed, glancing sideways at him on the 3rd hour of the climb. "An old wound. Rockfall years back. Broke 3 ribs and my collarbone," healed crooked. You should have let it be set by someone who knew what they were doing. There wasn't anyone else out there to set it. He said it plainly, without self-pity, the way a man states a simple fact of terrain. It was just me and the mountain that season. Something in her expression shifted, the same flicker of understanding he'd seen the night in the grain cellar. You live alone up here, have for a long while. That is a hard way to live. It's the only way I know. She was quiet a moment, guiding her mare around a fallen deadfall. Among my people, a warrior who lives alone by choice is either mourning something too large to speak of, or waiting for someone worth ending the solitude for. She glanced at him again, longer this time, and there was nothing idle in the look. Which is it, Hunter? Tobias felt his ears go hot despite the cold wind. Never really thought there was a third option. There is not, Urzoth said simply, and turned her attention back to the trail, though he caught, or thought he caught, the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. They reached a ridge overlooking a narrow stone valley by mid-afternoon, and Urzoth called the party to a halt with a raised fist, sliding from her mare without a sound, motioning them down into the cover of the rocks. Below, tucked into the mouth of a cave system Tobias had never once had reason to explore, smoke rose in thin gray threads from a dozen fires, and moved between crude timber shelters, and even from this distance Tobias could see the telltale glint of stolen orc weapons stacked in neat rows near what looked like a makeshift forge. There, Urzoth breathed, the Ash Reavers. One of Voss's guardsmen, a heavy-set man named Corin, swore under his breath. That's 20 men at least, more than 20. We can't take that with 5. We are not here to take it, Urzoth said. We are here to see it and to carry word of it back where it will matter. They watched for the better part of an hour, and in that hour Tobias saw enough to turn his stomach cold. He watched a man take up a hand axe, its handle freshly carved with a crude imitation of clan markings, and drive it again and again into a fence post as though practicing the motion of a raid. He watched another haul a wagon load of stolen grain saxkestrel hold grain, by the markings on the burlap toward the cave mouth, where a broad-shouldered man in a captain's coat too fine for an outlaw stood directing the unloading with the easy authority of someone used to command. That is Sila's crane, Urzoth murmured. He led men once before he decided there was more profit in leading thieves. My scouts have seen him twice near our herding grounds, always at a distance, always gone before we could close on him. He's building towards something, Tobias said. Look at the stockpiles. That's not raiding for survival, that's raiding to arm for a real strike. The full moon, Urzoth said. It is when my mother's ultimatum expires, when your fort either abandons the valley or stands to fight my clan. Whichever happens, Crane's men will use the chaos to take Kestrel hold while its defenders are looking the wrong way. Corin was staring at her now, with an expression caught somewhere between grudging respect and old suspicion. You're saying the orcs and the fort are being played against each other. By him. I am saying exactly that, human, and I would not waste breath saying it if I did not believe it enough to have already bled for the saying. They rode back down the mountain in a hard, cold silence, each of them carrying the weight of what they had seen, and it was well past dark by the time the lights of Kestrel Hold appeared below them, warm and small, and for the first time since Tobias had come to live behind its walls, achingly fragile. Voss did not believe them. Or rather, Tobias thought later, Voss believed enough of it to be frightened, and fear made him stubborn in exactly the way that would prove most dangerous. An outlaw camp in the high caves, Voss said, pacing the length of the council hall while rain drummed against the shuttered windows. Fine. I'll grant you that much, Quinn, though God knows how you managed to drag a scouting party halfway up the mountain on an orc say-so. But this notion that they're framing the clan, that's a convenient story, isn't it? A story that just happens to mean we shouldn't fear the orc sitting in our grain cellar. It's not a story, it's what we saw with our own eyes, Tobias said. The marked weapons. The stolen grain, Corin saw it too. Corin saw a camp of thieves. He didn't see proof of some grand conspiracy to start a war, Voss stopped pacing, fixed Tobias with a look that had more weariness in it than malice. "I want to believe you, son. I do. But I have 300 souls behind these walls who lost kin to orc raiders in the last border war, and an orc chieftain's ultimatum sitting over our heads with a fortnight left on the clock, and you're asking me to gamble all of it on the word of the very warrior who delivered that ultimatum." "She didn't deliver it," Tobias said. "That's the whole point, Commander. She rode 2 days past her own mother's fire to warn us instead. Or she's clever enough to know that's exactly the story that would earn her our trust." Voss shook his head. "I'll double the watch. I'll send riders to the Crown garrison at Fens Crossing to request reinforcement before the moon turns. But the orc stays chained until I have more than a hunter's word and an orc's tears to go on." There had been no tears, Tobias almost said, and there had been nothing in Urzoth Doomhammer's bearing that resembled a woman angling for anyone's sympathy. But he held his tongue because he understood, even through his frustration, that Voss's fear was not baseless. It was only aimed wrong. He went to the grain cellar again that night, as he had every night since her capture, and found her sitting with her back against the stone post, chains loose enough now at his quiet insistence to the guard that she could at least stretch her legs. "He does not believe us," she said before he'd even spoken. "He's scared. Scared men make slow decisions." Tobias sat across from her on an overturned crate, close enough that the lantern light pooled warm between them. "I'll keep working on him." "You have been kind to me longer than any human ever has, Tobias Quinn, and I find I no longer know what to do with that." She said it plainly, without artifice, the way she seemed to say everything, and it struck him harder than any softer confession might have. "Among my people, when a warrior shows another warrior such loyalty, there are customs for it, ways of answering a debt so it does not sit crooked between two hearts. You don't owe me anything." "I did not say I owed you." Her eyes were very steady on his in the lantern light. "I said there are customs. Would you like to hear one?" Tobias's mouth had gone dry. "I would. When a Doomhammer warrior chooses to bind her fate to another's, she does not ask permission of clan elders, and she does not wait for a ceremony of drums and firelight, though those things come later if she wishes them. She marks the one she has chosen. A bite here." She touched 2 fingers to the curve of her own shoulder, just above the collarbone, deep enough to scar, so that any who see it will know he belongs to someone strong enough to have claimed him and meant it. "It is not done lightly. It is not done for men who have not earned it." "And have I earned it?" Tobias asked, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Urzoth leaned forward, chains chiming softly against stone, until her face was close enough to his that he could feel the warmth of her breath, could see every fleck of amber in her eyes. "You carried my brother 2 miles in the dark and told no one," she said. "You stood between me and 3 crossbows in the rain with nothing in your hands but an open palm. You have argued for my life to a man who could have you flogged for the trouble, 3 nights running, and you have not once asked me for anything in return." Her voice dropped lower still, rough velvet at the edge of a growl. "If that is not earning it, Hunter, then I do not know what your kind considers worth." "I'm not sure I know what I'm agreeing to," Tobias admitted, though he had not moved away, had not wanted to. "But I know I don't want you to stop talking." Urzoth's laugh was low and startled out of her, genuine in a way that transformed her whole face. "Then let me finish what I started days ago in the mud, when I chose your name over your commander's." She reached up, slow, deliberate, and traced 2 fingers along his jaw, the calluses of her palm rough against his skin, and he felt the touch land somewhere far deeper than the surface of him. "I did not ride here to threaten you, Tobias Quinn. I rode here because some part of me already knew, before I had words for it, that I would rather stand beside you in whatever storm was coming than watch it break over your head from a safe distance." Urzoth. Her name in his own mouth felt like something sacred, and he said it again, softer. "Urzoth, I've spent most of my life certain nobody would ever look at me the way you're looking at me right now. Then your life, until this moment, has been a foolish waste of a good man," she said, and closed the last distance between them herself. The kiss was not gentle, not at first. It came with the force of 2 days of storm finally breaking, her hand fisting in the collar of his coat, his fingers tangling in the loose braids at her jaw, tusks and unfamiliar angles, and none of it mattering at all against the sheer hunger of finally being chosen. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Urzoth pressed her forehead to his, chains forgotten between them. "I am going to get you out of here," Tobias said against her mouth, "if I have to unchain you myself and answer to Voss for it after." "I know you will," she murmured. "That is precisely the trouble, Hunter. I have started to believe every promise you make." He did not have to break her out. 3 nights later, word reached the fort that a homestead on the valley's northern edge, the Renner farm, a young family who had come out with the resettlement wagons only that spring, had been struck in the deep dark, its barn burned, 2 horses driven off, and scattered across the churned mud of its dooryard, unmistakable and damning. Crude axes carved with clan sigils, and a torn scrap of Doomhammer war paint smeared across the broken gate. By dawn, the whole of Kestrel Hold had gathered in the central yard, and the fear that had been simmering under the fort's daily business for weeks boiled over all at once into something uglier. Tobias arrived at a run, having heard the commotion from his cabin at the fort's edge, and found the crowd already turned into something with teeth, farmers and tradesmen and off-duty guardsmen alike shouting for the orc in the grain cellar to answer for what her kind had done. Voss stood on the steps of the officers' hall, his face grim, a length of rope already coiled in the hands of the guard beside him. "They struck the Renner farm not 4 miles from here," Voss called out over the crowd's roar, "while the orc who rode into our fort under the guise of a warning sat safe in our own cellar. I want to believe there is more to this than it appears, but I have a family with a burned barn and a terror they'll carry the rest of their lives, and I have 300 souls behind me demanding I do something about it before the moon turns, and the whole clan descends on us in earnest." "She's been chained the whole time," Tobias shouted, shoving through bodies to reach the steps. "She couldn't have ridden to the Renner farm and back if she'd wanted to. She has kin who could have done it for her," someone in the crowd snarled. "Or she gave them the layout of our defenses herself, chained or not, feeding whatever fool sat guard with her wagging tongue and honeyed words." The accusation landed like a struck flint, and Tobias saw, with a sick lurch, exactly where this was tipping. He saw 2 guardsmen dragging Urzoth up out of the cellar stairs and into the gray morning light, her wrists still bound, her face set in the same fearless stillness she had worn the night she rode through the gate, though he could see now, close up, the fine tremor in her shoulders that had nothing to do with cold. "String her up," someone shouted, and it caught like dry grass, spreading voice to voice until the whole yard was a single roaring animal. "Hang the orc! Hang her before her people come for the rest of us." "No." Tobias's voice cracked across the yard, and for one raw instant it was not enough, was nothing against the tide of fear pouring off 300 frightened people, and he watched in horror as the guards dragged Urzoth toward the old gallows tree at the yard's edge, a thick length of rope already looping over the lowest bough, Voss himself standing frozen, torn between the crowd's fury and whatever doubt Tobias had planted in him days before. "Commander." Tobias shoved his way to the base of the tree, planting himself between Urzoth and the guard tightening the noose. "You cannot do this, not without proof. Not on the word of burnt barn timber and a scrap of paint any fool with a knife and a pot of dye could have smeared there himself." "Step aside, Quinn," the guard holding the rope warned. "Commander's orders." "I gave no such order," Voss said sharply. But the crowd's noise had grown too loud, too many hands already reaching to drag Urzoth the last few feet, to loop the rope, to force her up onto the crate beneath the bough, and in the chaos of it Tobias could no longer tell whose orders were being followed at all. He saw Urzoth's eyes find his through the crush of bodies, saw that even now, with a noose being fitted rough around her throat, she showed no fear for herself only, for one unguarded heartbeat, a fierce and terrible grief that he would be made to watch it. "Cut it," Tobias roared, and threw himself bodily up onto the crate beside her, one hand closing hard over the rope just above the knot, the other bracing against the guard's chest to shove him back a step. "You will have to hang us both, because I am not stepping down from this crate until someone in this yard shows me a shred of proof that did not come from a burned fence post and a torn rag." The crowd's roar stuttered, faltered, uncertain suddenly what to do with a man they knew, a quiet, hard-working tracker who had never once raised his voice against any of them, standing with his own throat bared beside the orc they meant to kill. It was in that stuttering silence that a rider came pounding through the gate at a dead gallop, shouting fit to wake the dead, and every head in the yard turned as one to see Corin, the guardsman who had ridden with them to the Reaver camp, half falling from his horse in his haste to reach the gallows tree. "Hold!" Corin bellowed, breathless, mud-splattered, waving something over his head as he shoved through the crowd. "Hold in the name of the crown, hold that rope." "What is it, man?" Voss demanded. "Speak." "I rode to the Renner farm at first light to look for tracks, same as the tracker taught me," Corin gasped out, and thrust forward what he carried, a boot print cast in wax from the churned mud near the burned barn, and beside it a torn scrap of gray wool with a distinctive brass button still attached, snagged on the broken gate where it had caught as its owner fled. "Those boot tracks are shod in iron, Commander. Orcs of the Doomhammer clan ride barefoot or in hide wrappings, every man and woman of the scouting parties I have ever tracked. And that button." He held it up, turning it so the weak morning light caught the Crown and Anchor stamp pressed into the brass. "That is a deserter's mark, army issue from the old garrison at Fenn's Crossing. I know it because my own brother wore one just like it before he ran off 5 years back to join whatever outlaw band would have him." The yard had gone deathly quiet. "The Ash Reavers," Tobias said, still standing on the crate with the rope's rough fiber cutting into his own palm where he gripped it above Urzoth's throat. "Men, Commander. Human men, wearing our own deserters' buttons, wielding orc-marked axes they carved themselves, burning our own farms to make it look like clan work. Everything I told you 3 nights past. Everything Urzoth Doomhammer rode 2 days through open country bleeding to warn us of, before her own mother's ultimatum ever reached your gate." Voss's face had drained of all its earlier certainty, replaced by something far more difficult to dawning, sickened understanding of exactly how close his own fear had brought him to hanging an innocent woman for another man's crime. "Cut her down," he said, hoarse. "Cut her down now." Tobias did not wait for the guard. He drew his own hunting knife and sawed through the rope himself, catching Urzoth as the crate was pulled away and her knees buckled, lowering her gently to the ground while the crowd that had been screaming for her death not 5 minutes before now stood in a silence thick enough to choke on. "I told you," Urzoth rasped, her voice raw where the rope had bitten her throat, one hand curling weakly into the front of Tobias's coat, "that I trusted this fort held one honest man." "You've got more than one now," Tobias said, holding her against him, heedless of the whole yard watching, heedless of anything but the fact that she was breathing, that she was alive, that his hands were shaking too badly to be any use for anything but holding on to her. "I've got you. I've got you." "I know," she whispered, and for the first time since he had met her, Urzoth Doomhammer closed her eyes and let herself simply be held. Voss did not apologize in front of the crowd, though Tobias suspected the commander would carry the shame of that morning for the rest of his days. What he did instead was practical, and in its own way, an apology plain enough. He struck Urzoth's chains himself, returned her hammer to her own hands, and called the fort's council into session before the sun had cleared the eastern ridge. "We have a fortnight before the Doomhammer ultimatum expires," Voss said, pacing the length of the hall while the fort's leading men and women, and Urzoth and Tobias among them now, listened close. "If Sela's crane means to strike during that confusion, then our only chance of surviving it is to strip the confusion away entirely. We need proof solid enough to carry to the Doomhammer chieftain herself, before her patience runs out and her warriors come down that pass in earnest. "I will carry it to my mother," Urzoth said. "She will not doubt what I bring her with my own hands, especially not after what nearly happened here this morning. But proof alone will not stop Crane. He has 20 men or more, arms enough to outfit a small war, and a fortnight's head start on whatever plan he means to spring." "Then we stop him before the moon turns," Tobias said. "Not with 20 men against 20, with the mountain itself." Every eye in the hall turned to him. "I've hunted that high country since I was a boy," he went on. "There's a single narrow defile the reavers have to funnel through if they mean to strike the fort from their cave camp, Corin, and I marked it on the scout ride. Rockfall country. Loose scree above a choke point no wider than a wagon track. If we can bring the clan's warriors and the fort's guard together, even a small combined force, we don't need to match Crane man for man. We need to close that defile on him while he's still moving through it, and let the mountain do the rest." "You are proposing my mother's warriors fight beside your commander's guard," Urzoth said slowly, "against a shared enemy." "I'm proposing we stop pretending we're the enemy at all," Tobias said, "when the real one's been laughing at both of us from a cave the whole time." It took 2 more days of hard riding and harder talk to make it happen. Urzoth returning first to her mother's camp with Corin's wax boot print, and the deserter's button as proof. Tobias and Voss following a day behind under a branch of white cloth that had not been raised between orc and human in that valley in longer than anyone living could remember. Chiefess Yavra Doomhammer was a broader, grayer echo of her daughter, scarred across one eye from some old battle, and she listened to the evidence laid before her with a stillness that told Tobias exactly where Urzoth had learned her own iron composure. "You risked my daughter's life to bring me this," the chiefess said at last, turning the brass button over in one massive hand. "She risked her own life to bring it to us first," Tobias said. "I'm only trying to see that risk was worth something." Yavra Doomhammer studied him for a long moment and then looked past him to where Urzoth stood, chin high, unflinching under her mother's scrutiny. "You care for this human," the chiefess said. It was not quite a question. "I have chosen him," Urzoth said simply, and did not look away, though a flush darkened the green of her cheeks. "Whatever comes of it, mother, that choice is already made." Yavra Doomhammer's expression did not soften exactly, but something in the set of her shoulders eased, the way a held blade eases when the fight it was drawn for turns out not to be necessary after all. "Then we had best make certain there is a valley left worth choosing to live in," she said, and turned to her assembled war leaders. "Sound the horns. We ride with the humans." The defile above the old Rockfall country was narrow enough that Tobias had once nearly lost a pack mule to it. A channel of broken stone, barely wide enough for 2 riders abreast, walled on both sides by unstable slopes of scree that a hard enough shout could bring thundering down. It was, he had explained to both Voss and Yavra Doomhammer, the only route Crane's men could take that let them approach Kestrel Hold from the high ground under cover of the surrounding ridgeline, and it was the only place in the whole valley where a force half the size of the Reavers could hope to stop them outright. They took their positions 2 nights before the full moon, orc warriors and fort guardsmen shoulder to shoulder along the ridge above the defile in a silence that felt, to Tobias, like the held breath before a held breath. Urzoth crouched beside him at the lip of the rock, her hammer across her knees, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her even through the bitter mountain cold. "Are you afraid?" she asked him quietly. "A little," he admitted. "Mostly for you. Do not be. I have fought harder battles than this with worse odds." She glanced sideways at him, and in the darkness her eyes caught what little starlight there was, amber and steady. "But I will admit, Hunter, that I like knowing you fear for me. It has been a very long time since anyone has had cause to." "Get used to it," Tobias said, "because I intend to keep having cause for as long as you'll let me." She reached over in the dark and found his hand, laced her fingers through his, calloused palm against calloused palm, and they stayed like that, silent, until the first torches appeared far below at the mouth of the defile Cela's Crane's men, moving in a long dark column exactly where Tobias had said they would, 20-odd riders and twice that on foot, their stolen orc-marked weapons glinting dully in the moonlight, moving with the confidence of men who believed they rode into a valley already at war with itself. Voss raised his hand. Yavra Doomhammer on the far side of the ridge raised hers in answer. And when the column had passed fully into the narrowest throat of the defile, both commanders brought their hands down together. The rockfall that followed was not subtle. Fort guardsmen and clan warriors alike heaved loosened boulders and shoveled scree down both slopes at once, and the night filled with the roar of tumbling stone and the screams of men and horses caught in a trap that gave them nowhere to run. It was over faster than Tobias had expected, not a battle so much as a closing door. The defile choked with rubble in both directions before Crane's men had even fully understood what was happening to them. Those who tried to fight their way out found orc warriors and human guardsmen waiting on both rims, arrows and spears trained down into the chaos. And within the hour, what remained of the Ash Reavers had thrown down their stolen axes and surrendered rather than die buried under a mountain that did not care whose colors they had painted on their weapons. Silas Crane himself was dragged up out of the rubble near dawn, his fine captain's coat torn and filthy, his composure entirely gone, and it was Urzoth who put the point of her hammer beneath his chin and made him look up at the assembled ring of orcs and humans who had, for one single night, stopped hating each other long enough to end him. "You wanted a war," she said, "so that you could pick over what was left of it. Instead, you gave two peoples a reason to stand on the same ridge and watch you fail together. I hope, wherever the Crown's justice sends you, that thought keeps you exceedingly warm." Tobias came to stand beside her as the fort guardsmen bound Crane's wrists, and Voss and Yavra Doomhammer, standing not 10 feet apart on ground that 11 years ago would have seen them try to kill each other on sight, exchanged a long look that was not yet friendship, but was no longer quite enmity either. "There is a debt owed here," Yavra Doomhammer said at last, addressing Voss directly. "Your fort's tracker and my daughter together uncovered a threat that would have burned both our peoples to the root while we were busy hating each other over it. I am not a chieftain who forgets debts easily paid. Nor am I a commander who forgets a warning that saved 300 lives," Voss said, and for the first time since Tobias had known him, he inclined his head to an orc, not as a defeated man, but as one offering respect earned in blood and stone. "I think, Chiefess, that this valley has had enough war in it for a lifetime. Perhaps it's time we tried something else." "Perhaps it is," Yavra Doomhammer agreed, and her gaze slid to her daughter, and to the human tracker standing close enough beside her that no one watching could mistake the nature of it. "It seems, at least, that some small piece has already found its own way to take root, whether either of us commanded it or not." The formal treaty took another month of careful talk to hammer into shape grazing rights renegotiated, old grievances aired, and if not fully healed, at least set down where both sides could see them clearly. A standing agreement that scouts from both peoples would ride the border together rather than in wary isolation, so that no outlaw band could ever again slip a lie between them unnoticed. Kestrel Hold's rebuilding went forward with orc laborers working stone alongside human carpenters for the first time since the fort's original ruin, and though old suspicion did not vanish overnight, it thinned, season by season, into something that could at least share a fire without flinching. Urzoth stayed. It was not a question either of them debated aloud, not really, though there were quiet nights on the fort's mended walls where she told him, in that low, unhurried way she had of saying the truest things, exactly why. "I could return to my mother's camp," she said one evening, sitting with him on the parapet above the gate while the last of the sunset burned gold along the western ridgeline. "I am her heir in time. There is honor waiting for me there if I want it. Do you want it?" Tobias asked, and made himself ask it plainly, without the fear he still sometimes felt when he thought too hard about how easily she might have belonged anywhere but here with him. I want you, Urzoth said, simple as breathing, and turned to face him fully, her hand finding his jaw the way it had that first night in the cellar. I have walked among warriors my whole life, hunter, men and women both who feared nothing and bowed to no one, and not one of them ever made me feel the way you did the moment you stood on that crate with a noose beside your own throat because you would not let me die alone. My mother will have other heirs, and this valley will need bridges between our peoples for years yet to come. I would rather be one of those bridges, standing here beside you, than a chieftain sitting safe and lonely in a hall 100 miles from the only man who has ever looked at me and seen not a threat, not a weapon, not a symbol of some old war, only me. You could have anyone, Tobias said, and it came out rower than he meant it to, the old ghost of every year he'd spent certain no one would ever choose him first. Warriors, chieftains, whole clans who'd count themselves lucky to have you lead them. And you're choosing a mountain tracker who owns one good coat and a cabin with a leaking roof. I am choosing, Urzoth said, fierce and certain, the only man I have ever met who never once asked me to be smaller, softer, or less than exactly what I am. Do you understand yet, Tobias Quinn, how rare that is? How little I care for a whole clan's counting when I have already found the one thing worth keeping? He did not have words equal to that, not really. So he answered her instead the way she had first answered him, with his mouth against hers, slow this time, unhurried, no crowd or crisis pressing at their backs, only the two of them and the long gold light and a silence that finally had nothing frightening left inside it. That night in the small stone cabin at the fort's edge that had been his alone for 8 lonely months, Urzoth Doomhammer completed the courtship she had begun in a chained cellar weeks before. She marked him as her people marked what they had claimed and meant to keep, not cruelly, but with a fierce, deliberate tenderness that stole the breath from him entirely, her mouth pressed to the curve of his shoulder, her hands steady even as his were not. And when it was done, she traced the mark with gentle fingers and looked at him with an open, unguarded want that he had spent his whole life believing was a thing reserved for other men, luckier men, men who had never once had to learn to be alone. There, she murmured against his skin, low and rough and satisfied. Now any who look upon you will know exactly whose heart they are looking at. Good, Tobias said, pulling her closer, marveling at the simple, staggering fact of her weight against him, chosen and choosing. Let them know. What followed was neither hurried nor hesitant, a slow unfolding of trust two people had already earned a dozen times over in blood and rope and rockfall, warmth given and returned in equal measure, until the small cabin with its leaking roof held, for the first time in a very long while, no loneliness left in it at all. There was, inevitably, one more gathering the whole valley turned out for, though it bore no resemblance to the terrible morning at the gallows tree months before. When the aspen along the ridgeline had gone gold with the turning season, Yavra Doomhammer rode down from the high camps with a procession of clan warriors, and Commander Voss opened Kestrel Hold's gates to receive them not as visitors under uneasy truce, but as honored kin come to witness a binding. They held it in the Mendied yard, at the base of the very tree that had so nearly become a gallows, and had since been stripped of its old rope, and hung, instead, with strings of autumn leaves and small clay bells that orc children had helped fort children thread together over the preceding week. Urzoth stood in her fitted warrior's leathers, freshly oiled and gleaming, her hammer set aside for once in favor of a simple braided cord binding her wrist to Tobias's, the old custom of her clan reworked, at her own insistence, so that human eyes too could understand its meaning without translation. I was sent into this valley to deliver a threat, she said, her voice carrying clear and strong across the gathered crowd of orc and human alike, and I chose instead to deliver a warning, because some part of me already knew that the man standing at that gate deserved the truth more than my mother's enemies deserved my obedience. I have never once regretted that choice. I do not intend to start regretting it now. I was just a tracker, Tobias said, when it came his turn, his voice rough with feeling he no longer bothered trying to hide. A man who kept to himself because he'd stopped believing anyone would ever choose to stay. Urzoth Doomhammer did not just choose to stay. She chose to fight for a truth nobody wanted to hear, to stand accused before a mob and never once ask me to save her, though I'd have burned this whole valley down before I let that rope close. She taught me that being chosen isn't something that happens to lucky men in stories. It's something you build together, one hard truth at a time. I intend to spend the rest of my life building it with her. Yavra Doomhammer herself spoke the final words of the old rite, translated now for both people standing in that mended yard, and when she called the binding complete, the small clay bells strung through the gallows tree's branches rang out sweet and clear over a crowd that, 8 months before, would have sooner seen an orc and a human dead in the mud than joined hand to hand beneath its boughs. They did not linger long at the celebration that followed, though there was music and roasted meat, and orc war drums beat alongside human fiddle tunes in a combination that should not have worked and somehow, in that mended yard, entirely did. Sometime past midnight, with the fires burned low and most of the fort finally, exhaustedly asleep, Tobias and Urzoth climbed together to the same parapet where he had first heard her choose him over a chieftainship, and sat with their shoulders touching, watching the last of the season's stars wheel slow overhead. "Tomorrow the real work starts," Urzoth said quietly. "Border patrols, grazing disputes. All the small, unglamorous business of two peoples learning to trust each other one season at a time. It will not always be easy." "No," Tobias agreed, "but I've got a feeling we're better suited to it than most." "Because we already survived the hard part," Urzoth said, and there was warmth in it and no small amount of pride. A gallows tree, a rock slide, a chieftain's disapproval and a commander's fear. If we could weather all of that in a single season, Hunter, I do not think there is a border dispute in this world with teeth sharp enough to trouble us now. Below them, Kestrel Hold slept on, its mended walls standing solid against the cold mountain night, orc lanterns and human hearth fires burning side by side for the first time in longer than either people cared to remember. And when the first gray light of dawn finally crept over the eastern ridge, it found the two of them still there on the parapet, her head resting against his shoulder, his arms settled around her with the easy, certain weight of a man who had finally, after a whole lifetime of solitary mountain silence, found the one person worth never being alone again. The storm that had gathered over that valley outlaw greed dressed up as clan war, an old fear ready to burn two peoples down to ash over a lie, had broken at last and passed, and left behind nothing but the quiet. Urzoth Doomhammer and Tobias Quinn sat together in that quiet as the sun cleared the ridgeline fully and washed the mended fort in soft gold light, and neither one of them moved to break the stillness, because there was, at long last, nowhere else in the whole wide world either of them would rather be.